Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, the fallout from fire and fury. President Trump's comments on North Korea raise alarms in Asia and elsewhere and prompt Pyongyang to threaten an attack on a U.S. base in Guam. Then our series on stopping superbugs continues. Tonight, as farms become breeding grounds for disease, the overuse of antibiotics could spell danger for our food.
On every grocery store shelf in this country, I guarantee you're going to find drug-resistant bacteria on the meats of those shelves. And then they get in our guts when we consume the meat.
Plus, pushing the bounds of freedom. We hear from a woman who dared to drive in Saudi Arabia. All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. The latest flashpoint in the American showdown with North Korea has drawn notably different responses from President Trump and his top national security aides. It all follows reports that Pyongyang can now make nuclear weapons small enough to fit inside a long-range missile. John Yang begins our coverage.
Amid the escalating war of words, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson urged calm.
I think Americans should sleep well at night. I have no concerns about this particular rhetoric of the last few days. What the president was doing is sending a strong message to North Korea in language that Kim Jong-un would understand.
Tillerson spoke on his way to the U.S. territory that's home to the B-1 bombers that have been flying training missions over the Korean peninsula, drawing North Korea's ire.
The Korean People's Army is now carefully examining the plan for making an all-consuming fire at the areas around Guam with a medium to long-range strategic ballistic rocket in order to contain the major U.S. military bases on Guam.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis warned Pyongyang to stop consideration of actions that would lead to the destruction of its people. The volley of tough talk comes amid increased North Korean tests of missiles that analysts believe could strike the American mainland. Yesterday, President Trump delivered a stark warning.
They will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
Today in South Korea, a government spokesman denounced Pyongyang.
These kinds of comments by North Korea do not help in the relationship of South and North Korea.
But in Japan, the chief cabinet secretary welcomed the American muscle flexing.
The United States have said all options are on the table. The Japanese government supports this attitude.
President Trump said this morning that he had ordered a modernization of the nation's nuclear arsenal. It is now far stronger and more powerful than ever before. Hopefully, we will never have to use this power. While Mr. Trump did order a review of the country's nuclear capability during his first week in office, it was President Barack Obama who began a $1 trillion modernization of the arsenal. It's barely begun and will take decades to complete. The Trump administration has seemed to send a variety of signals about its approach to Pyongyang. Mr. Trump had called on China to pressure its renegade neighbor, but after missile tests last month, he seemed to give up on Beijing.
We'll handle North Korea. We're going to be able to handle it. It will be handled. We handle everything.
Last month, CIA Director Mike Pompeo said the solution to North Korea's nuclear threat is to oust Kim Jong-un.
The thing that is most dangerous about it is the character who holds the control over them today. So from the administration's perspective, the most important thing we can do is separate those two.
Amid a New York Times report that Mr. Trump's fire and fury threat caught aides by surprise, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said the tone and strength of the message were discussed beforehand, if not the exact words. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said military action would be inevitable if North Korea continues on its current path.
President Trump has basically drawn a red line, saying that he'll never allow North Korea to have an ICBM missile that can hit America with a nuclear weapon on top. But if there's going to be a war, it's going to be in the region, not here in America. A prospect that is sending a shudder through Asia and the world.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.
We'll have more on the North Korean nuclear threat and how the Trump White House and North Korea's neighbors are responding after the news summary. Also today, North Korea said that it released a Canadian pastor who's been serving a life sentence there since 2015. The North State News Agency said that Hyun Soo Lim was let go on, quote, sick bail, but gave no other details. It comes 2 months after the death of American student Otto Warmbier, who had been in a coma when he was released from North Korea. In the day's other news, there is word that FBI agents have searched a home of former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and seized documents and other materials. The Washington Post first reported the pre-dawn raid and said it happened in late July. A Manafort spokesman confirmed the search and said that Manafort has, quote, consistently cooperated with law enforcement and other serious inquiries and did so on this occasion as well. Allegations of election fraud set off deadly clashes in Kenya today. Early results from yesterday's vote showed President Uhuru Kenyatta with a strong lead. But challenger Raila Odinga claimed that hackers infiltrated an election database. Protesters in Nairobi and elsewhere burned tires and set up roadblocks. At least 3 people were killed. Odinga urged calm but said that he doesn't control the people.
Democratic elections are based on the basic principle that the sovereign are the people. It is not a show for those who stand for election and those who run it.
The Kenyan Election Commission defended its system and denied interference, quote, before, during, or after the vote. The United Nations says that up to 50 migrants were deliberately drowned off the coast of Yemen today. The UN's migration agency said that a smuggler forced more than 120 people into the water when he saw authorities on the shore. The migrants were from Somalia and Ethiopia. Their average age was around 16. The death toll from yesterday's powerful earthquake in southwest China has risen to at least 19. It hit near a national park that is one of the country's top tourist attractions. Nearly 250 people were injured. Rescue crews worked around the clock to pull victims from under heaps of debris and collapsed rock, but they were slowed by unsafe conditions.
As you can see on both sides of the valley, there are mud and rock slides everywhere, so our rescue has been cut short. All we can do is stay here and observe until there's a change for the better. Once that's happened, we'll go in there and begin the rescue.
A second strong earthquake in far northwest China hit this morning and left dozens of people injured and damaged more than 1,000 homes. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on 8 more people in Venezuela amid that country's deepening crisis. They target current and former government officials for their role in the creation of President Nicolas Maduro's new all-powerful constitutional assembly. One of the sanctioned individuals is the brother of the late Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez. There was yet another attack targeting security forces in France today. A man rammed his car into a group of soldiers in a Paris suburb, injuring 6 of them. After an hours-long manhunt, police cornered the suspect on a nearby highway, opened fire and wounded him. The man's motivation was unclear, but officials say they are looking at it as a potential terror attack.
We know it was a deliberate act. It was not an accident. What I can say is that the anti-terrorism section of the Paris prosecutor's office is in charge of the case. This shows that today the threat remains extremely high and that our security forces, our military forces, are still being targeted.
Later, heavily armed and masked police searched a building believed to be linked to the attacker. President Trump appeared to bristle today over comments by the Senate's top Republican on health care. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said on Monday that Mr. Trump had, quote, excessive expectations about how quickly lawmakers could act. But in a tweet, the president said he disagreed, adding, after 7 years of hearing, repeal, and replace, why not done? And on Wall Street today, stocks were lower as investors weighed tensions between the U.S. and North Korea. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 36 points to close at 22,048. The Nasdaq fell 18, and the S&P 500 dropped a fraction of a point. Still to come on the NewsHour, why tamping down the North Korean nuclear threat is so difficult. Steps the U.S. is taking to upgrade its own nuclear arsenal. how livestock breed antibiotic-resistant superbugs, and much more.
And these are bacteria.
Returning to our top story tonight, the threats and counter-threats between Pyongyang and Washington. Joining me now are Abraham Denmark, a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, and Mike Chinoy, a former senior Asia correspondent for CNN. He has visited North Korea 17 times and is now a senior fellow at the University of Southern California's U.S.-China Institute. And we welcome both of you to the NewsHour. Abe Denmark, let me start with you. Given what has happened in the last 24, 48 hours, how do you size up the situation right now between the U.S. and North Korea?
I think we're at a bit of an inflection point that both Kim Jong-un and President Trump have elevated the tension in terms of rhetoric between the two sides, yet the policies that the two sides have been on have not radically changed. Kim Jong-un and North Korea have been conducting ballistic missile tests at a relatively regular pace. And the on-the-ground policies that the United States has been pursuing has also been fairly consistent. The real change here has been changes in the rhetoric, with Kim Jong-un putting out very strong statements, as well as President Trump making his very strong statements. And so the question there is, what happens after these statements have been made?
And that's what I want to ask you about. And just quickly, you follow the region, the East Asia region, very closely. How is all this being received there?
There's a great deal of concern. Amongst our allies, there's concern that the messaging out of the Trump administration has been fairly chaotic, in that different senior officials are speaking about different policy positions. So there's a lot of questions about where the United States really is when it comes to North Korea. And there's also broader concerns, and I think deeper concerns, about how the United States is going to handle a North Korea that's making very steady progress in developing a robust, credible nuclear capability that is able to reach the United States.
Mike Chinoy, again, this is an area you follow so closely. We talked about how many times you visited North Korea, the North Korean mainland. How do you see this situation right now?
Well, I think what the North Koreans are doing has been quite predictable. They have believed for many years now that the best way to guarantee their security is to have a nuclear and a missile capability that would deter the United States. And this dates back a long, long time. It was reinforced in the early 2000s when the North Koreans saw the U.S. invade Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein, who didn't have nukes. They saw Libya's Muammar Gaddafi overthrown. He had voluntarily abandoned his nuclear program. So the North is really committed to this. They've just accelerated, I think, in the last couple of years, the pace at which they're doing it. I think one of the big questions is how the North Koreans are going to respond to the very confusing signals coming from Washington. Secretary of State Tillerson has mentioned talks, but President Trump is talking in very, very forceful and extreme language. And so I think there is a risk, because I don't think the North is going to change its approach, of a misunderstanding leading to some kind of conflict.
Why do you believe there's a risk of a misunderstanding?
Well, the North Koreans are sitting there and they're going to respond to threats from the United States with a full speed ahead, because that's just their style. This is not a system or a regime or a leadership that's going to bow to that kind of external pressure. And if they fear that the very strong language from President Trump means the U.S. might in fact be considering some kind of preemptive strike, then it's possible they will calculate that they need to strike first. But I think there is one other point that gets lost in all of the inflammatory headlines, which is the North Korean position continues to be that they will not give up their nuclear or missile capabilities unless the U.S. abandons what Pyongyang calls Washington's, quote, hostile policy. And I think if you parse the North Korean rhetoric, there might still be an opening for some kind of negotiations. But again, that depends in large part on whether the extreme level of confusion in the signals from Washington is clarified in a way that would suggest the U.S. is interested in talks. And right now, that's not at all clear.
Well, and as we are sitting here talking ourselves, I'm told by our producer that the Wires report that North Korea is now saying that they will have a plan to attack Guam by the middle of August. They go on to call what President Trump has been saying, in their words, is a load of nonsense. And they are also saying that only absolute force can work with President Trump. Abe Denmark, what does this tell you about what the United States is dealing with and what our allies in the region are dealing with?
We're dealing with a country in North Korea that has a very clear idea of what it wants to do. It sees the development of a nuclear capability as essential to the preservation of its regime, and it's willing to bear significant costs in the pursuit of that in terms of diplomatic isolation, severe economic sanctions. They're continuing to make progress on that. So the question is, how do we get them off of that path? In terms of the threats that they've been making about Guam, there's actually quite a few steps that they have and other options that they have between where we are now with the elevated rhetoric and actually conducting strikes against the United States.
What do you mean?
We've seen in the past North Korea doing several things, attacks against South Korea on the DMZ, sinking a ship in the Yellow Sea, as you may recall, several years ago, which in the past was able to demonstrate, they were able to demonstrate to their own people that they're strong, that they're able to attack South Korea, but it did not escalate into a war. And the question now is, what options is North Korea considering, really considering beyond this threatening rhetoric about Guam, and how will the United States and our allies respond to that?
Mike Chenoy, the question one hears from a number of people is are the North Koreans suicidal in their attitude? Because one assumes that if they were to take any sort of military strike or of the kind we're discussing here right now, the threat against Guam, something in the region, that there would be a return strike that would hit directly at the leadership of the North Korean government.
I don't think the North Koreans are suicidal, and I think you have to be very careful in assessing North Korean rhetoric, because if you look at the history, going back a long, long time, the North Koreans are masters of incendiary rhetoric. Brinksmanship is the cornerstone of the way they approach the rest of the world. These kinds of threats keep their adversaries off balance. They feel it gives them the initiative, but I don't think you can always take it literally. I recall, for example, in the spring of 1994, when tensions were high over the North's then nascent nuclear program, North Korean officials said that they would turn Seoul, the South Korean capital, into a sea of fire. But 4 months later, after former U.S. President Carter visited North Korea, there would have been an agreement for the first ever summit meeting between the North and the South, although it didn't happen because North Korean leader Kim Il-sung died. So I wouldn't, just because the North Koreans talk about attacking Guam, I wouldn't take that literally, although as a military planner, you obviously have to take all contingencies into account. But don't assume that their rhetoric means that they're actually going to do everything they threaten to do.
So we can't know, Abe Denmark, just quickly here, finally, what the Trump administration is going to do. But if you're in their shoes right now, do you respond in kind with escalated rhetoric, or do you try to calm things down?
I think you do two things. Rhetorically, I would try to calm things down. President Eisenhower would practice this. When Khrushchev's rhetoric would get more and more escalated, his rhetoric would get more and more calm, and that gave a great sense of strength to our allies and to our adversaries. But I would also do a lot more on the ground in terms of enhancing our ability to deter North Korea and to reassure our allies. We have extremely strong alliances in Japan and with South Korea, and there's a lot we can do there to demonstrate to North Korea that we have a great deal of capability and will to act. And that would also send a message to our allies that we're there for them, that we're reliable, and that we're capable.
Abe Denmark, Mike Chenoy, we thank you both. As we reported earlier, the president tweeted this morning that he had ordered the modernization of America's nuclear weapons. That decades-long $1 trillion project was actually begun under President Obama. Last year, the NewsHour aired a series about that process, which we called Aging Arsenal. In one report, special correspondent Jamie McIntyre, with the support of the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, looked at the debate over the wisdom of updating the United States' three-pronged nuclear arsenal. He interviewed the top military commander in charge of it, who has since retired. Here's an excerpt of that story explaining what the nuclear triad is and why it exists.
Turn. Watch it. 7 away.
Missiles, bombers, subs. America's nuclear triad, a three-pronged approach to deterrence that dates back to the 1960s. When the former Soviet Union was the enemy, MAD, mutual assured destruction, the strategy, and thermonuclear war seemed a real possibility.
The real key here, as you look at the combination of the triad, is making the adversary's problem very complex, very costly, so that restraint is a better option.
U.S. Strategic Commander Cecil Haney is the four-star admiral in charge of America's nuclear arsenal. He says the triad endures because it's still the surest way to guarantee that even if hit with a first strike, plenty of U.S. nuclear weapons would survive, enough to allow Haney to present the president a full range of options.
Ship is rigged for dive, sir.
It's a strategy based on redundancy, having backups for backups.
6970. Roll bridging, tube 2.
But to critics, maintaining and rebuilding all three legs of the triad in the 21st century amounts to expensive overkill. Among those critics, former Defense Secretary William Perry.
Well, you can have belts and suspenders, and then belts and suspenders for the belts and suspenders, and that's what we're getting into here.
Perry says the current strategy is based on the folly of winning a nuclear conflict, the kind of Cold War thinking caricatured in the classic movie Dr. Strangelove.
Mr. President, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks.
The whole sort of Dr. Strangelove rationale is the one with how you use nuclear weapons, which was endemic to the Cold War, I don't think is in place today. If we regard nuclear weapons, the role of nuclear weapons today, as preventing the use of nuclear weapons against us, then all of that goes away.
The United States is at the point where, to maintain the safety and reliability of its aging nuclear arsenal, largely designed in the 1950s and 60s, almost everything needs an upgrade. There are plans for new submarines and stealth bombers, along with upgraded bombs and missiles to go with them.
28, launcher closure door open.
Add in the possibility of next-generation land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and the price tag comes to an eye-popping $1 trillion over 30 years. Each leg of the triad has its advantages. Submarines are stealthy, virtually undetectable, and therefore nearly invulnerable. Bombers are slow enough to be recalled at the last minute.
Item 129, first stage ignition to missile.
It's the third leg, the intercontinental ballistic missiles on hair-trigger alert that are under the microscope.
We're flying over the missile field that essentially surrounds Minot Air Force Base. 150 ICBMs buried in silos underground, spread across 8,500 square miles of North Dakota.
It's just one of three missile fields that cover 5 states: Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, and North Dakota. 450 ICBMs altogether. Were it not for the security fence, this silo would be barely visible in the snow. But the locals know where it is, and so do America's enemies. For now, the debate over the triad is purely academic. The latest Pentagon budget funds plans to begin rebuilding all three legs, and no one in Congress is mounting any serious opposition. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jamie McIntyre.
And you can watch our full series on the U.S. nuclear arsenal on our website, pbs.org/newshour. Stay with us. Coming up on the NewsHour, a new book from a woman who dared to drive in Saudi Arabia. But first, our special series, Stopping Superbugs. This week, science correspondent Miles O'Brien and economics correspondent Paul Salmon tag team again for a look at how the use of antibiotics in livestock can lead to unhealthy, even dangerous outcomes. Miles begins at a Missouri pig farm as part of our weekly science series, Leading Edge.
Pig farmer Russ Kramer is up early, tending to his herd, talking to the animals.
I have the ability to interact with pigs. I think that they are the smartest, most social animals. I tell people that if you like kids, you love pigs.
He is the 5th generation in the Kramer clan to farm this plot of land in Frankenstein, Missouri. He introduced me to the newest residents.
Everything that we do on this farm as far as feeding and as far as production, as far as genetics, all has to do with keeping them healthy.
Russ Kramer is obsessed with keeping his pigs healthy because he knows firsthand that his own health depends on it.
That's about as good as it's going to get.
30 years ago, the farmer from Frankenstein created a monster after he adopted industrial farming techniques to increase his pig production.
My pigs were unhealthy. I would go through my pig pens 3 times a day, injecting them with antibiotics to cure some sort of chronic diseases that I had on my place. And, in fact, I was actually growing superbugs on this farm and didn't know it.
How he found out nearly killed him. He was gored in the leg by a boar, and the wound became infected. His doctor told him not to worry. Antibiotics were the cure, but it wasn't that simple.
We tried 2 different tetracyclines, we tried streptomycin, we tried erythromycin, amoxicillin, 7 different antibiotics in total, to no avail.
So he checked the reports from his veterinarian to see what infections his pigs had and what antibiotics worked for them.
It came back, resistant, and finally, aha, there was one antibiotic at that time that had some effect on that disease. They treated me, and thank God there was this new generation drug. And so that transformed my life.
This is what we call a colony. So
molecular microbiologist Lance Price also grew up on a farm, a cattle ranch. He watched firsthand as a neighboring dairy went from a small-scale family operation to a high-density industrial-scale farm. They are called concentrated animal feeding operations. Lance Price says they are fertile breeding grounds for disease.
You pack them together, snout to tail in the case of pigs, and beak to feather in the case of chickens and turkeys. They're going to share bacteria. So we've engineered a system that makes them sick. Rather than change that system, we actually just add low doses of antibiotics to try to prevent infections.
Price and his team at George Washington University conduct large epidemiological studies of meat that is sold in grocery stores. They culture the bacteria found on the meat and test to see how they react to discs saturated with antibiotics. He is hunting for superbugs.
If they're susceptible, that is not resistant to the antibiotic, they will be inhibited. They won't grow near the disc. But when they grow right up to the disc, like all of these, that means that that bacteria is resistant to all those antibiotics. You don't want to get infected with one of these. And these are bacteria that we actually isolated from the food supply.
He sequences the genomes of E. coli from food and from people, comparing them to a database of 7,000 distinct types of the bacteria.
We're trying to figure out, hey, did this urinary tract infection come from the, E. coli from animals or from food?
He says there is a strong case linking the use of antibiotics in livestock to the spread of drug-resistant bacteria in humans.
So on every grocery store shelf in this country, I guarantee you're going to find drug-resistant bacteria on the meats of those shelves. And then they get in our guts when we consume the meat from those animals. Most of the time that's a dead end, right? We will eventually get rid of those bacteria, we'll shed them away. But sometimes they'll take hold.
In the 1950s, farmers discovered feeding livestock steady, low doses of antibiotics made them grow faster. But this so-called subtherapeutic use of these precious drugs raised concern in the medical community and the government. In 1977, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration proposed a ban on subtherapeutic uses of penicillin and tetracycline in animal production. But the rule was never enacted, and the problem worsened. In 1989, human and livestock usage of antibiotics was about equal. Today, agriculture accounts for about 3/4 of all the antibiotics used in the United States.
We have to stop now. We have to stop abusing them now so that we can slow this problem down.
Mei Wu is a senior attorney at the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Using antibiotics and misusing them just to make animals get fatter or so you can cram more together and have more stressful conditions and feed them worse diets is the worst way to be using these incredibly important drugs.
In 2010, the NRDC sued the FDA to force it to adopt its own rule.
The Food and Drug Administration is changing the status of many antimicrobials used in feed.
Instead, it released new regulations limiting the use of medically important antibiotics in animals to when it is necessary for assuring animal health and with veterinary oversight and/or consultation. Liz Wagstrom is the chief veterinarian at the National Pork Producers Council.
The pork industry believes that the most judicious uses of antibiotics are those for treatment, control, and prevention of diseases.
Wagstrom says the pork industry will follow the FDA guidance, but she says pork producers will continue to use antibiotics as a routine disease prevention tool, even if there are no illnesses detected in their livestock.
It is a judicious and responsible use of antibiotics to go ahead and prophylactically treat some of those animals when we know they're exposed, we know that it's a specific disease, and we're going to use that antibiotic for a defined duration of use.
This is a huge loophole, as my colleague Paul Salmon discovered in his conversation with Johns Hopkins University environmental health scientist Ellen Silbergeld.
What has been stated as the recommendations, not enforceable policy, by the FDA is that agriculture should not use antibiotics for growth promotion anymore, but they're still permitted to use the exact same amounts of antibiotics in feeds for prevention. So I think the category of prevention now has blown up.
No need to worry about this at Russ Kramer's farm in Frankenstein, Missouri. His pigs do not spend their life confined indoors, cheek to jowl. They have much more space, easy access to pastures, even a wooded area Kramer calls his pig park. He's trying to mimic what pigs would find in nature.
This is the best place in America to raise pigs in my mind.
Right here.
Right here.
He rarely uses antibiotics at all, and then only if an animal is sick. Antibiotics saved Russ Kramer's life 30 years ago. Today, he's doing all he can to return the favor.
They're lifesavers, but what we have to ingrain into people's mind and society's mind is we have to do everything we can to preserve them. It's the most important, the most critical health issue in the world, and I'm here to do whatever I can.
After I got back from Frankenstein, I sat down with Paul Salmon to share some anecdotes from Russ Kramer's bucolic pig farm. So Russ Kramer was ahead of his time, but the market has kind of caught up to what he is doing. It's still a small piece of the big pie. Just a few thousand are raised in the way Russ does them. So the question is it scalable?
Well, in chickens, producers claim that 30% of the market, something like that, the chickens are raised antibiotics free. So that's where we're going next, actually. That's our next story. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm economics correspondent Paul Salmon.
And I'm science correspondent Miles O'Brien.
Next, bringing care to women in a country whose medical facilities, already scarce, were destroyed by years of civil war. Special correspondent Fred de Sam Lazaro reports on the mission of one woman in Somaliland. It's part of his series, Agents for Change.
She had a very easy delivery and delivered last night.
It was a pretty typical day at the Edna Adan Hospital. 3 babies had just been born, a half-dozen high-risk women were in labor, several others were being treated for life-threatening illnesses, and at the center of it all, the hospital's founder and namesake, Edna Adan.
These are the kind of women I built the hospital for anyway. Anemic, a woman who's had previous complications, a woman who has a scar, a woman who has lost babies before.
What's especially remarkable is where this is all taking place, in Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, an enclave that declared its independence 3 decades ago from the war-torn Somalia, but is not recognized by the rest of the world. The region suffers from some of the world's highest rates of infant and maternal mortality. Adan was born here 79 years ago, the daughter of a prominent physician. At 17, she won a scholarship to study in England, becoming a midwife. She returned to Somalia, marrying a politician who would become prime minister. She's seen with him here and next to President Lyndon Johnson at a White House reception. She fled Somalia's civil war in the 1980s. When Edna Adan returned to her native Hargeisa, the city lay in ruin from years of war. She was given a plot of land that had been used as a burial ground, and on it laid the foundation for rebuilding the city's healthcare system.
Most doctors had fled. Some had been killed.
Adan had worked for the UN while in exile and used her savings and a fundraising campaign to build what had been a lifelong dream, a non-profit hospital and nursing school designed to specifically address the health needs of women. In 2002, she opened the 45-bed hospital, which has since doubled in size and grown to include an outpatient clinic and 2 surgical theaters.
We've delivered 20,000 babies in the past 15 years. And we have the lowest maternal mortality, 1/4 of the national average. And it's still too many. Many of these women should not have been lost, should not have died, but they bring them too late.
Another factor in the high rate of maternal death and various complications in labor is female genital mutilation. Nearly 95% of young girls in this country are thought to be subjected to genital cutting. Adan has become an outspoken critic of the practice.
My mission now is to talk to fathers. I'm blue in the face talking to mothers.
But it's the mothers who are taking the daughters to have this done, right?
If the father says no and puts his foot down, there would be a chance that some of these girls will be saved. Space your child. Yeah. Happy, clean, healthy, well-fed.
She has also become a vocal advocate for family planning in this conservative Islamic society. Adan planned to counsel this patient, who was rushed here by her husband the previous night, hemorrhaging badly after she miscarried what would have been her 7th baby.
The first advice that we will tell her when she comes back for her post, before she goes home, is not to get pregnant.
Is she in any way equipped to control that decision?
That decision we usually do with the husband. Because at a moment like that, you see, it's somebody who almost lost a wife. He ran with her, he brought her here, his wife's alive. He doesn't want to go through that again.
The hospital does offer limited family planning services, most frequently implantable contraceptives for women. As Edna Adan's reputation has grown, so has its mission. The hospital now treats men, and it brings in physicians and surgeons from the U.S. and other countries who volunteer to do specialized procedures, treating patients with cleft palate and hydrocephalus, among other things, all free of charge.
You see, they're totally conjoined.
Sometimes all the hospital can offer is compassion. This pair of 8-month-old twins, conjoined at the heart, were discharged from another hospital soon after they were born.
They're not going to find oxygen anywhere else. So whatever we can do palliatively, we will do. But surgery is totally out of the question.
So it's palliative care until nature
yeah, God makes that decision. I don't want to be the one that switches it off.
In a region where roads are poor to non-existent, getting to a Hargeisa hospital can be daunting. so Adan has a team of midwives and nurses to treat women and children in the vast rural areas of Somaliland. Khadan Abdullahi was in the first class of midwives to graduate. We watched as she helped vaccinate newborn babies at a small clinic in Abdi Adan, and then teach a prenatal class on nutrition for these pregnant women at a refugee camp.
Edna is a role model for myself.
Edna is a role model for you?
Yeah, myself, yes.
30-year-old Dr. Shukri Muhammad Dahir was also trained as a nurse and midwife by Edna Adan. She went on to become a physician and surgeon and is now back practicing at the Adan Hospital. She says initially patients weren't sure about the idea of a woman in that job.
Like when I'm dealing with an emergency case, they used to say, "Oh, you are a female and you are going to operate this lady, maybe she will die." That idea still exists, but it's not as strong as when I graduated.
Although she's groomed new doctors and midwives, Edna Adan, almost 80, has not chosen a successor.
I have 800 graduates from various courses. And I have thousands of people whose lives I've touched. And they're all my children. And I'm still looking for someone who's crazy enough to say, "I'll look after them for you, the way you did."
If only for that reason, Edna Adan says, she has no plans to slow down anytime soon. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Fred de Sam Lazaro in Hargeisa, Somaliland.
And what an inspiration she is. Fred's reporting is part of the Undertold Stories project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. And we'll be back shortly with another addition to our NewsHour bookshelf, a memoir from the leader of the movement supporting women's right to drive in Saudi Arabia. But first, take a moment to hear from your local PBS station. It's a chance to offer your support, which helps to keep programs like ours on the air. For those stations still with us, to the story of a good man on a quiet and heartbreaking mission, one many people would never consider undertaking. From Los Angeles, special correspondent Gail Zamak Laman brings us this profile, which originally aired in February.
What are you doing?
Mohammed Bazik has become something of a local hero here in Los Angeles recently.
I'm not an angel, I'm not a hero. It's just what we're supposed to do as a human being.
In 1978, Bazik, then a former marathon runner, came to the U.S. from Libya to study engineering. He met his wife here in the U.S. and became a citizen in 1997. But today, he is a different kind of champion. His distinction? He is the only foster parent in this city of 4 million who cares solely for terminally ill children.
Open, good.
What happens if you get sick?
Father doesn't get sick day.
It is not a glamorous job.
You have to do it from your heart, really. If you do it for the money, you're not gonna stay for long.
Over almost 3 decades, he and his wife cared for scores of children. 10 have died in his care. Most of the children he's taken recently are born with terminal illnesses. Sometimes they are abandoned or born to parents with drug addiction. Once they enter the foster care system, the county works to connect them with foster parents like Mohammed. The memories of the children, he says, still live with him every day.
And this is the kid who died with cancer. He has a cancer, he died. They operate on him, and they find the cancer separate all of his organs. So the doctor said, they stitched him back and said, there is nothing we can do for him.
Today he lives with a 6-year-old foster daughter born with microcephaly, a rare disorder in which a baby's brain doesn't fully develop. She cannot see or hear. She responds only to touch. At 7 weeks old, the county took her from her biological parents. They called Bazik, and he agreed to take her in. He also cares for his biological son, Adam, who himself was born in 1997 with brittle bones, dwarfism, and other physical challenges. Taking in critically ill children is a painful process. He knows at the start their time together will be short.
I know it's heartbreak. I know it's a lot of work. I know it's gonna hurt me sometimes, you know. I feel sad, but in my opinion, we should help each other, you know.
Much of his dedication, he says, derives from his faith. Bazik is a practicing Muslim, and his story gained special notice recently after President Trump issued an executive order seeking to bar immigrants from 7 majority Muslim nations, including his own home country of Libya. Bazik says he sees the negative stereotypes out there, but he is not deterred.
As a Muslim, I don't hate nobody. I love everybody, I respect everybody.
His faith has continued to guide him through many heartbreaks. His wife passed away in 2015. Now he has a nurse's aide that helps with care on weekdays from 8 to 4. But still, it's a full-time job, one he handles by himself every night and every weekend. With his foster daughter's seizures happening more and more often, he usually sleeps near her on the couch, just in case. He says he hasn't had a day off since 2010. And the challenges have continued to mount. In November, the caregiver became the patient.
I find out in November I have colon cancer. And they told me I have to operate on you in December. I said, I talked with the surgeon. I said, doctor, I can't. You have to give me time because I have a foster kid who is a terminal, and I have my son, he's a handicap. There's nobody for them, you know.
Did anyone go with you to the hospital?
No, that was the scary part, you know.
That's not having noises. He's talking.
Yep, she's talking.
There's so much heartbreak, and yet you keep doing it.
I mean, these kids need somebody.
Even if there's that much heartbreak.
Even that much heartbreak. This, I mean, to me, death is part of life. And I'm glad that I helped these kids go through this period of his time, you know. And I helped him, I be with him, I comfort him, I loved him or her. And until he passed away, I am with him and make him feel he has a family and he has somebody who cares about him and loves him.
That they're not alone.
No, they're not alone.
Bazik underwent a successful cancer surgery in December, and treatment is ongoing. His story has received wide attention that led to an online fundraising drive that has already raised over $200,000. He says he will use the money for a new roof, air conditioning, and maybe even a replacement for his 14-year-old van.
I was reading all the comments that people put on the internet. I was crying because of their kindness and the nice word they said.
And in the end, he says he has been humbled by just how much his story has brought out others' heart and humanity.
I can't describe the feeling, you know. I mean, you see how many nice people around us, but we don't see them because of this turmoil in this time. We didn't see how many nice and kind people around us.
Do you think you see more of them now?
Yes. There is always good in this world, you know, more than the bad. Always. That's what I believe.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Gail Zemak-Laman in Los Angeles.
Continuing now our week of books, we take an intimate look at the fight for women's rights in Saudi Arabia. Jeffrey Brown has the latest addition to the NewsHour bookshelf.
In May 2011, Manal El-Sharif drove a car. That is remarkable only because it happened in Saudi Arabia, where women are banned from driving and many other activities in what most of us would consider normal daily life. She was arrested and spent 9 days in prison before an international outcry helped gain her release. She's continued her activism for women's rights, now living outside her native country, and she's written her story in the new book, Daring to Drive, A Saudi Woman's Awakening. I want to ask you first about this idea of an awakening, because you write about yourself in your early life,
yes,
very much part of the system. When a group of women drove in
yes,
1990 and as a kind of public protest,
yes,
you scorned them.
Yes.
But something happened to you.
Because we got the wrong story. They didn't have a voice. We heard about them. We didn't hear from them. Till the moment of truth came to me in 2011 when I started my own campaign and I got to know their story. They're my inspiration.
What did you see in the system? You refer to it as the guardianship system.
Yes, yes. The male guardianship system is the one, the source of all evil when it comes to women's rights in my country, where I am 38, mother of 2, and an engineer, but I'm still a minor. I'm legally minor. I need a permission from a man to do anything in my life, and that man could be my father, my husband, and it could be even my own son if he's an adult.
All this affects all parts of daily life.
Every single part of your life.
Is there any space? Is there any space where you feel of freedom or freedom to act or move?
Things been losing now. One of them is, for example, going to school. Now I don't have to get permission to go to school or open a bank account. Imagine these things I had to get a permission to do before.
So driving became the
symbol.
The symbol,
yes,
right? Why driving?
Nothing will emancipate women in my country like driving, because it gives them a sense of independence, it gives them a sense of liberty and freedom. And that breaks all the things that have been learned and brainwashed with, that we have to be obedient to these unjust laws and we're weak, we cannot take decisions by our own. This will give independence to women. This is what I believe, at least.
What is it that keeps the system in place, the system of the gender relations?
2 things, men prejudice and women submission. These 2 things need to be changed to change the system.
How much is it changing? How strong is the movement? I mean, I see even recently, in recent weeks,
yes,
there have been some arrests of women, yes, for various kinds of behavior.
True. Yeah. There have been arrests for some of the leaders for this movement, which is good, by the way. That means they're recognizing it's influential and it's making an impact. The millennial generation, the internet native generation of women, are changing they're changing the rules of the game in Saudi Arabia. They're outspoken, they're fearless, they're courageous, and they really don't submit to the rules my generation submitted to. And I do believe women have the key to change. If they break the wall of fear, if they challenge these unjust laws, and I've been told always respect the law, and I use a line from suffragettes. It says, I will respect laws that respects me.
Mm-hmm. You're quoting the suffragettes, and you clearly studied your history,
yes,
women's history.
Yes.
What is it that, for you, caused that change? I mean, of learning all of this history and wanting to become part of it.
Do you know, when I started, I've been always an activist and I didn't know. I've never read about other feminists or activists. But when you face so much backlash, so much hardship, so much pain, you seek relief in places and history stories that happen to the same people doing the same things that you're doing. So I started watching movies about the women's rights movement. I mean, the movement to get the women vote in the U.S. I watched suffragettes. I read Rosa Parks' book. And I was amazed by the similarities between my story and them. And I'm studying how they changed the system by the non-violent, the civil disobedience and non-violent struggle. And it made sense to me when I was watching these things. The civil rights movement itself removed the black people, put Saudi women. This is exactly the situation in Saudi Arabia today.
You go through the book, through many experiences that you had of being in prison, of having to leave the country, having to leave one of your children behind from your former marriage. Do you have regrets now? What is your life like now?
Jeff, I do have a lot of regrets in my life. I think we are all, as humans, we do have regrets. But the speaking up, I've never regretted that. Because if I didn't speak up, I would lose myself.
All right, the book is Daring to Drive, Manal El-Sharif. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
You're watching PBS.